All right, I think we can get started. So thanks, Sam, for leading this, and it's such short notice, really. So maybe you can start by introducing yourself briefly and explaining how you came to think about this and why you care.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Introducing myself. Yeah, I'm Sam. I'm an undergrad at ANU at the moment. Um, yeah. So why do I care? Oh, how did I come to this particular piece of work? So, like, really, how did I come to be here is because I did like the vacation scholarship thing at Uni Melb. Um, over the summer, and this kind of thing was like the topic. So um, that's how I came to be here specifically. Why was I interested in this piece of work in particular? Is kind of before I came to uni, I was like interested in like the AI alignment stuff, and I came to uni like in pursuit of that kind of, and a course last semester which was kind of like a bit of a project course on interpretability. Well, it was on like that broadly, and then what I ended up focusing on was like, um, yeah, like interpretability work in the vein of um, like the distill threads, basically, if people have seen those, which was like feature. Yeah, it was like, yeah, it was trying to figure out like what specific parts of neural networks did, like what does this neuron do, or like what does this particular direction in this layer of the neuron represent. um yeah, and this piece of work, which I'm basically going to talk about, this one paper, this toy models of superposition, is like kind of it kind of picks up a little bit where that work left a loose end lying about. So yeah, is that
Great.
an introduction?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Maybe I can like segue. So yeah, in that like previous work, where they're trying to like, they have like some network, and maybe just a sketch.
So just the previous work, Distill was the name of the kind of quasi journal. You're talking about a series
Yeah.
of papers in that, or is it there was a specific paper called Distillation or something? You just mean the whole body of work?
I mean the basic. I mean the. I guess I mean like the circuits threads,
Sure. Yeah.
or yeah, basically the body of work that is in Distill, which relates to interpretability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, one like loose end, or like one thing that came up in that was that like, hey, we picked a neuron and we found images which like maximized it, or we optimized to find images to maximize some particular neuron within a network. And we got like weird things, like I think their example is like they had a cat and a bus. So like, why do we get cats and buses both activating this neuron? And like the kind of simple slash obvious answer is that like it's not individual neurons which make up meaningful representations. It's like it's a direction within a layer. Yeah, but like I guess their word for this in that paper was like polysemanticity, which like is what kind of becomes superposition in this new paper. Like superposition is like the mechanistic like exploration of how polysemanticity works, I guess, is one way to talk about, is one way to like give a bit of like history to this paper. Anyway, yeah. So I might actually start talking about the paper now. Um, so like the overview is something like overview. So like yeah. So this paper is like, it's mostly an empirical like exploration. Exploration of like very simplified, very neat toy models trained on a toy data set. Yeah. Okay, and like what they end up finding is some nice, neat things like, yeah, they vary this parameter of their data set, this sparsity parameter, and they find that like as they vary the sparsity parameter, their model chooses like different strategies. So basically like, yeah, these won't mean anything right now, but like they might come to mean something. Hopefully, I'll explain. Yeah. So, I guess I'll begin by talking about the structure of the toy dataset and then the structure of the toy model, and then the results in like what happened as you vary some parameters within the dataset. What happens to like the model that you get after training. Yeah, and then at the end, maybe I'll try to like, I don't have a great grasp of like technicalities of SLT or like the actual like implementation, or so I'll give like a hand wavy this is maybe an intuition that might not be misguided about like what might be going on with these in terms of the kind of conceptualization that is in some of the SLT discussion of phase transitions. Okay. So, okay, describing the data set. For data set. Okay, yeah. So I guess like maybe like maybe this is not a great idea. Let's say yeah, so the task that we're gonna be training our model to do is to take is basically to like be an autoencoder to compress and then decompress some like data set of vectors. So like yeah, we'll say that like the original feature space is n dimensional, and like the latent space or the hidden space will be m dimensional, and like the task is to take vectors from Rn to encoded vectors in Rm and back to Rn. Yeah, okay. And the specifics of what this like collection of vectors look like are important because like basically the experiments are varying this parameter which controls with a property of the data set and seeing how the models change. So yeah, so like the important notion is like sparsity. Yeah, sparsity. So for each of like the vectors in our data set, we have this parameter mu, which basically describes like the probability that any component of a data point is 0.
Sorry, Sam, I think it's probably better to stick with the notation in the paper if that's not going to throw you off too much.
Ooh, what is the notation in the paper?
It's S, but if you're working from notes and it's mu everywhere, stick with mu. But just for the audience, it's an.
Yeah, S is a good idea. S makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure why I wrote mu.
I think I might have
Okay,
written
thank
mu
you.
in one of our meetings. That might have been where that came from. So maybe I'll take the blame for that. But
Mm, mm.
yeah, it's also
X to X.
you said per vector, which isn't. Is that really true? I mean, it's like for you fix a sparsity and then I don't know. You
Yeah,
you
yeah. Across the
sample.
data set.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. I guess maybe I'll say it like the data set is generated via
Yeah.
yeah, or yeah. So like yeah. So we have this parameter s, which is between 0 and 1, like, yeah, and then we generate our data set. I'm going to call it big X. So our data set, like an element, well, yeah, a point in our data set is firstly, like, yeah, yeah, a point in our data set is an n-dimensional vector where with probability s, a particular entry is zeroed or is set to 0, and then entries which were not set to 0 are drawn from like a uniform distribution on 0, 1. So like I guess maybe
Yeah, it's a bit hard to write.
guess
I guess you could write x is a column vector with x1 through xn in it, and then you can say how the
yeah.
xi are generated, right?
How the xi are generated. Yeah, okay. Yep. X is a column vector. Yeah. Yeah, so with each component equal to 0 with probability equal to s and xi drawn from the uniform distribution on 0, 1 otherwise. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I hope everybody at least knows what I'm trying to get at. I'm getting thumbs up. Okay, good. Okay. So like, yeah. So this like sparsity thing. One like note is that like, at least in some ways, it makes sense that like lots of real data sets are like very sparse. So maybe like the example is like in like a text, yeah, in like a corpus of words, no, it's not in a corpus of sentences, say, like, if this is not a like a concrete analogy or like a concrete, anyway, in a corpus of sentences, if our features are like individual words, like most sentences have 0 instances of a particular word in them. So maybe if like our data set is vectors where each entry in the vector counts the number of some particular word in that data point's corresponding sentence, like most of those vectors will have mostly 0 entries. So I don't know. This is just like,
Yeah, I think
kind of makes sense.
I think if you think about a network which is somewhere deep in the network, layer 10, and then you think about the Rn as being the vector of activations at that layer, and then the map from that layer to the next layer, suppose it's smaller, we're assuming m is less than n. So we're sort of thinking about some synthetic version of the distribution over vectors in the 10th layer, these Rn, these x's, generated by passing some other input distribution, maybe it's images, through the network up to that point. And so, yeah, if you accept that most, like at that point in the network, the activations kind of have semantic content, then they will tend to have that kind of sparsity that you're describing. And yeah, I didn't get this motivational point from the introduction of the paper the first time I read it, but so that's the kind of, I kind of half believe it, and I half believe that they just, like, this is the reverse engineering that gives you interesting stuff, so this is the distribution they chose. But I think it does seem fairly well motivated.
Yeah. So this is sparsity. Yes.
Sorry, Sam, while I'm interrupting you, can you move your character
Yes.
a little bit to the side so we can see the board? Yeah.
Sorry. What am I doing? Yeah. Okay. So our data set, we have this parameter, this sparsity parameter S, not mu. We also have, so this is like another parameter basically that they use. They have like this notion of importance. So like, I guess this actually comes into play in the loss function. We'll come back to that. But like in the loss function, they train their model on this data set. In the loss function they weight different features like differently. And like part of their justification for that is because like in practical applications, different features are more or less useful, or like more or less important to reconstruct something. Or for some like future task, it's more important or less important. I kind of think that it's less justified than the sparsity reason, and like more so, I kind of believe that they want to, like, it gives like the resulting model like consistent order, or a consistent ordering of vectors across like different trials and different sparsity settings. So anyway, importance is another thing to be described.
Maybe it's worth noting that in the paper they start with an importance parameter per coordinate, but later I think in all the experiments it's just the first parameter, and then the second parameter is, you like it's 1, the importance for the first coordinate, and then it's k, and then it's k squared, and then it's k cubed, I think, something like that, right? So that the parameter is actually like the decay rate, something like that, of how important each input is.
Yeah. So they start with independent importance weightings, and they move to like basically that.
Yeah. And just for the sake of connecting this to the phase transition, so that they will actually draw phase diagrams where on the x-axis is something like this number, and on the y-axis is the sparsity or something like it. So So importance comes into play, in like whether a network is like basically incentivized to represent like lower importance features at the cost of slightly, like it determines the balance of like how much you degrade the performance of encoding more important features to encode another somewhat less important feature. Okay, is there something I'm leaving out of the dataset description? I don't think so. Okay, and then their model is, so I mean the model that I'm going to talk about is they have Oops. Well, I'm actually glad it was him, because otherwise I was going to have to quit and rejoin. I thought it was my audio issue, so selfishly I'm pleased that it's not my problem.
I also experienced a rising blood pressure in the last 5 seconds, and then
Yeah, me too.
decay back to health
Yeah, that's right.
at his disappearance.
Actually, while it's reconnecting, I just want to ask, was the
Yeah.
importance, it wasn't clear to me in the paper, that did the implementers just choose it? Or was it like determined by the model?
Oh, it's just a choice. I mean, you could say they're attempting to have this distribution match what sort of is reasonable out in the wild in a large model, but
Like what they think a feature should be, or what makes sense to them.
well, I mean, yeah, I guess Sam will maybe say a bit more about that when he writes down the loss function. So yeah, let's revisit that question. Yeah. Welcome back, Sam. Sorry for the instability.
Oh, it's probably me. It's probably mine. Yeah, okay. Yep, the model. So they give a linear model, which is like to basically show that you don't get superposition. I think when you don't, I know you don't get superposition if your model is linear, but I think the reason they give one is to set some kind of baseline, I guess. But yeah, okay. So okay. Yeah. So the linear model is so like the encoding part of it is just multiplication by some parameter matrix, and like the decoding part is I think, oh yeah, there's a bias. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, basically, this W is like the projection from Rn to Rm, and like columns of this W like is the direction in the hidden space, which corresponds to like yeah, the basis direction of the feature space, like a feature. If that, yeah.
Just to be clear on the jargon, so the Rn is the space of features in their language, and each independent direction is thought of as being a feature.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but those directions are the basis in Rn, right?
Yeah, they're the elementary basis.
So each feature is like a one-hot vector.
Yeah. So like, yeah. Yeah. I think it's useful maybe now to like talk about like to like draw like so this hang on. This is like their linear model, and then like the non-linear model is basically the same thing, except we use a ReLU at the very end. So yeah, it's just encoding is the same, it's projection by this matrix, and then decoding is ReLU of the same. If we had, so as an example, like if we had say like n equals n equals 4 and m equals 2, like this is like the hidden space or the latent space, or yeah, and we can like plot the columns of W. Oh, is that right? Yeah, we can plot the columns of W in this space, So every column of W is like a vector in Rm. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Yeah. So like we might get something like this, where like, yeah. So what I'm saying is like, for a latent space of like 2 or 3, like we could just visualize the weight matrix as, yeah, the directions in the latent space corresponding to, well, the columns of the parameter matrix, or like where a one hot gets sent, basically. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Have I spoken about things I'm supposed to speak about? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the loss function. I can talk about the loss function. I should move out of the way. The loss function. Yeah, so this is their expression. So sum over the data set that gets trained on over the features of each element of each data point of this importance per feature of like the squared difference of input and output, which I'll write like that. No, I won't write like that. Yeah, so if we call x dash like the decoded, encoded x, then yeah. So yeah, it's basic. It's a pretty basic, regular looking loss function, except for this importance weighting. Yeah, which we have chatted a little bit about already. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, I guess I'm gonna draw like their nice diagrams, which like display the behavior that we get as we vary sparsity. So yeah. So with m equal to 5, no, with n equal to 5, so yeah, with a 5-dimensional feature space of our original data set and like a 2-dimensional latent space, and then like a sparsity, which like...
Sorry to interrupt, Sam, but I might be able to give a bit of motivation for this importance factor. So if we go back to the example of Rn being the 10th layer of some convnet or something, if you integrate over all the inputs, those aren't the x's in this story, right? They're somewhere before, and the x's are the activations of the network on seeing those inputs. Then if many of the images in your data set have cats, then at this point in the network, this neuron should be active. And somehow, like you'll get a contribution to this loss every time you have a cat in an image, because it somehow goes through this part and sort of accumulates a little bit of error for each one of those images. So there's like an outer integral over actual inputs, and that sort of concentrates to give many instances of this square. I guess that's probably what they have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So. Yeah. I'm gonna draw like their nice diagrams. Yeah, from close to the beginning of the paper. So when they had a sparsity of 0 and they trained that, the nonlinear model from before, basically, I don't have a good way to do this, do I? They get something that looks like this, which is, So they have like W1 is somewhere, and I think it doesn't matter. And W2 is somewhere else, orthogonal to it. And then W3, 4, and 5 are just sent to 0. So like this is like sparsity 0. With sparsity 0, a nonlinear model does like the same thing that you would expect a linear model to do, which is just like pick the two most important directions in the data set. Yeah, so like, I mean, this yeah, I mean, I don't know if I said that beforehand, but like the importance is like, yeah, it gives an ordering. Yeah, it like, anyway, the importances are chosen, or the features are chosen in an arrangement where like the importance decreases with like the feature number. So yeah, like, I'm not sure. Anyway, the nonlinear model behaves just like a linear model when we have 0 sparsity. Yeah, which is something. For like a reasonably, or like I guess a middling sparsity, we get different behavior. Oops. So for a sparsity of 0.8, we get this thing. Which 2, 3, 4, and W5. Yeah, I'm not sure. Now I'll draw the last one, which is maybe the most interesting one, or I guess this one is interesting. For an even higher sparsity, like we get all of the features being represented, or being encoded in some way. It looks like a fifth. I'm not sure. Yeah, so, and like these are all supposed to be the same angle. Yeah, so what is going on here? Yeah, like, I guess the intuition is something like, with greater sparsity, you're more likely to not have to encode different things at the same time. So, like, for instance, like in this one, you know, we say we wanted to encode the vector like 1, 0, 1, 0, 0. Is that too many? No. Like this vector, when you project it down via W, just becomes 0 because like W1 and W3 are like directly opposing each other. So then when you try to leave this space, you just get like ReLU of the basis of the bias. I think. Yeah. WT plus B ReLU is just ReLU of B. So yeah, like basically that idea that like higher sparsity means less likely to need to encode multiple things at once, which might be interfering with each other. And then this one, like we have even higher sparsity, and yeah, so we have things like, so if we had like yeah, I'm not sure. I think the story, I mean, I'm fairly certain I would say basically the same thing again about this one, except that it can like fit even more things which have more potential to interfere with each other if they did happen to coincide in the same individual data point. But
Yeah, I guess
they do that less frequently.
the story to be told is about the the place in between where it switches. So clearly you're paying some price for not being able to reconstruct W5 in the middle diagram. But as you increase the sparsity, it's worth taking the risk of representing W5 because it's so rare that you'll have to recover a linear combination. And yeah, even if you do, it's very rare that you're going to actually have to represent the two opposing things that kind of cancel each other out in some sense. So you might as well actually spend whatever the parameters to represent the fifth thing.
Yep. So yes, I guess like now I could say something about phase transitions, which is like, yeah, so like I mean, yeah, so yeah, basically like, I mean these are like discrete strategies, like you were just saying, like at some point it becomes a worthwhile bet to take the risk of packing anything in, and like so I mean we never get like, well actually this is like maybe slightly noteworthy. This is all with ReLU networks, with like a swish activation function instead, even with like a reasonably high gamma. I might not write this down. Like I'll draw a little picture. You kind of you get like some amount of like non-discreteness. I'm not really sure what's going on. Like you get, well, let me find the picture.
What do you mean by discreteness?
I guess I mean like we have a thing which has 4 and the fifth one exactly at 0, and then we have a thing which has 5, and we have no like in between them. We never get a model which looks like them like starting to make space and this one starting to leave.
Oh, I see.
The blue one. I don't know. It's just like, I'm pretty sure that's like obviously not a good strategy, but like this is like where this must be like some kind of phase transition going on. I don't know. Anyway, this is with like, we don't get this with ReLUs, but with some like trying to replicate this, we do get slightly messy things. Like, got one that looks like this, which is like, something that's like not quite at 0, and a couple of other.
Just to fill in some context for those who didn't supervise your vacation scholarship project, so Sam was replicating the results in this paper and tried it with swish nonlinearity, which is an analytic approximation to ReLU. And there's a parameter there, which is the gamma he mentioned earlier, which if you make it large, swish with that parameter is a very good approximation to ReLU. So large enough, it will look like ReLU, but we were sort of curious how big it had to be before.
Okay, so I'll first talk about like their phase transitions, and then try to talk about like, I mean the same thing, but I'll draw their diagram. So I'll just copy it in. So they have this plot, which is it has, okay, so on the X is like importance or relative importance. So okay, I'll do better setup. It's R2 to R1, I think. Is that right? Yeah. Yep. So and then so we have like, we really only need like one importance weighting, which is the importance of the second one, because like there's only two features, so the only thing that really changes like how the loss will behave is the relative importance of those two features. So yeah, so over here on this side, like we have that like the second feature is only, yeah, it's a tenth of, whoa, it's a tenth, oops, it's a tenth of the importance.
There is an undo if you find that useful.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Importance. Yeah, so I guess like on this side is that the second feature is less important than the first. In the middle is that they're equally important, and on the right is that it's the second feature is more important. So yeah, and then the y-axis is the sparsity. Oh yeah, I guess I'm calling it the feature density. I can just do something now. Sparsity. So yeah, so so yeah, they start with a sparsity of, nope, they start with a sparsity of 0. Okay, 0. Quick math, 0.9. 0.09. Nope, 0.99. That makes sense. Yeah. And yeah, so like, yeah, so this is like, yeah, 2 dimensions of, hey, we're going to change this sparsity parameter in the data set that we're training on, and we're going to change the weighting of the features, the relative importance of the features that we're training on to get like a particular point in this plot. And then they look at like what kind of model resulted from the training on that data set with that loss, and like they categorize the models which can come out of this basically. So like the models, we can kind of plot them like if we're going R2 to R1, maybe we can't plot them in the same way.
You can just give the names for the different kinds that they have. I think they're pretty self-explanatory.
Okay. Okay, so not represented. Not represented. Is this what you're talking about? These not represented extra feature gets
that's right.
Dimension.
Yeah.
This labeling. Dedicated dimension. And superposition. This, yeah. So yeah, so these are in reference to the second feature. So like, yeah, so models, yeah, I'm gonna color in this whole plot, and like the spaces where it's white, it means that the second feature was not represented at all by the model, so the model just encoded the first feature. Blue is that it gets its own dimension and the first feature is completely ignored, and red means that superposition happened. So okay, and it looks like this. It's like, yeah, this section ignores the second feature. This section ignores the first feature, and all of this, the stuff with higher sparsity, puts them in superposition. And like, okay, yeah, so that's like a description of the behavior across a variety of different settings, and it kind of says, yeah, if you have one feature that's super, like much more important than the other, then you'll get superposition only with greater sparsity because it's like just not relevant to deal with that other one. And same thing over here. Whereas like if they're more equally balanced, you're more likely to get superposition with still, less sparsity. The interesting thing to do with phase transitions is like we have these boundaries, like across where like. So yeah, so they yeah, basically we have these boundaries where the the optimal strategy shifts in a discrete way, or like in a discontinuous way, or um yes okay, that might be all I say about that, I think, and then I'm not sure what else to say.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's great. Let me just check the time. Yeah, we've got about 13 minutes left. I mean, it's a fairly long paper. We could talk about many other aspects of it, but maybe this is a good place to stop for this time. Thanks, Sam. And let's have some discussion or questions. And I think we could certainly revisit this. Maybe somebody else could volunteer to speak about some of the remaining parts. Questions? Maybe I'll make a comment while you're collecting your thoughts. Maybe it's not so much a comment as a brag. So it's interesting to note here that the phase transition is associated to varying the true parameter or true distribution, right? So in SLT lingo, we're tuning two parameters that determine the distribution which is being matched by the model. This is not the usual. I mean, it's to the extent there is a discussion of phase transitions in SLT, it's in a couple of Watanabe's papers and his book, and it's usually to do with varying the prior. This is the kind of phase transition that Liam was studying in his master's thesis. Similar kind of setup. Well, not similar setup, but the true distribution was also the thing varying there. And it's worth noting why. I mean, this looks weird from a statistical point of view, perhaps, because, well, the true distribution is true, man. It doesn't vary. But if you keep in mind this analogy that I was making, well, that we were discussing earlier, and which is put forward in the paper, that we're thinking about these inputs as being activations in some deep layer of the network, right? So there, it's not strange at all for the true distribution to change. If you think about that happening over the course of training, right? So think about it as early on in training, like the early parts of the network are doing something stupid, and they deliver up to you, the long-suffering neuron in layer 10 or 11, something or other, and you're trying to, fit to that. And then later on in training, maybe they're delivering you something relatively different. Maybe it's more sparse and has a clearer hierarchy of importance or something. So a varying true distribution could be relevant if you think about it as being somehow separate out the time scale. So the later layers are maybe learning somehow much slower than the earlier layers or something like that. So there's maybe scenarios in which a varying true distribution is relevant if you're thinking about small parts of a model. Or at least that's how I'm thinking about it right now. Yeah, comments, other questions for Sam?
Maybe not for Sam, but do you see how this would sort of link to SLT in any way? The same way that like Liam's thesis did?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, one can formulate this in SLT in a straightforward way, and then it's apart from the ReLU, of course, but that's kind of the point of trying out the swish thing. Modulo that, which I don't think is a big difficulty. This is straightforward to formulate in SLT. And even you can kind of see how the explanation for these phase transitions should go. This is speculative, but maybe, Sam, could you put up they have these graphs of what is it? Representation per feature or something? What's the...
Yeah.
What page this is on?
Oh, is this when I had all the different shapes and colours as the density sparsity changed?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where theirs. I can draw one of the plots I made.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I had in mind the plot where on the vertical axis there's they call it m divided by the Frobenius norm, like dimensions per feature, and then on the x-axis is, oh, I didn't realize it's 1 divided by 1 minus s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've got that up in front of me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it looks something like this. I think this is one. And then they have these dotted lines.
Right. So this vertical axis, which is the Frobenius norm squared in their telling, is kind of a count of how many features are actually represented, which seems reasonable. And then the x-axis, as you go from left to right, means more sparse. Yeah, so it's... I don't pretend to completely understand it, but it's clearly the configuration of the eigenvalues of W is relevant here, and this is actually very close to how you set up a mathematical study of ADE singularities, and so I think it should be possible to understand the connection between those singularities and the kinds of singularities that are governing these phase transitions. At least that would be my guess. I think it's probably possible with some work to understand rather deeply what's going on here in the framework of SLT. Might be too optimistic, but I think...
cool, thanks.
Yeah, I think that should work. Questions, comments, hands put up for speaking about the rest of the paper. No more thumbs up. Everybody's quiet. Kenneth, are you awake? Have you discovered your predicament yet?
Yeah. Oh, hey, I can use the blocks now.
Yeah, everybody can. They're available on mobile now. Yeah, I think this paper is really important and interesting for several reasons. One, it's just cool to see these kind of geometric forms appear. As I said, it seems pretty likely that this is actually a very standard appearance of these kinds of configurations to do with things like the Mackay correspondence and configurations of eigenvectors. So maybe it's not astonishing, but I think it's a very beautiful toy model for understanding the relationship between the emergence of different behaviors in small neural networks and geometry. And it's also
I thought
very...
the idea in it was really cool.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And not obvious at all. I mean, it seems simple, the model they came up with, but I wouldn't have come up with that. So I'm very grateful they found such a clear test case.
I'm happy to tentatively maybe say I can keep presenting on this since
Awesome.
But what? I don't want to be overconfident. I haven't actually finished the paper yet.
I have confidence. All right. Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on the paper? As I said on the
This idea
Discord.
of, like-
sorry. Go ahead, Russell.
No,
Sorry, Russell.
this is really not worth it. But I took the call to action to heart, and I managed somehow to find the time to read the whole thing, and I enjoyed it. It was very reminiscent of the Sachs et al. Paper, or at least the main paper from them. They have a companion paper in which they give all the more kind of rigorous derivations, but the main paper is just a lot of really nice visualizations and interpretations of it, just like this one. So it was a nice experience, and I'm glad I did my homework, because I feel like I know what Ben's going to say, and I'm not sort of struggling to parse it all in the moment. I can actually think about what's going on behind the scenes.
They actually cite
Anyway,
those papers, right?
Sorry?
They're actually citing Sachs et al.
Yes.
And I thought that
That's
was well, there isn't much theory that's made its way into attempts to interpret mechanistically what neural networks are doing, and it's very nice to see. I mean, I think Sachs and his collaborators are doing some of the best work in terms of just trying to get a grasp on things, and it's nice to see it actually inform some mechanistic interpretability work. And yeah, more of that would be good. Ben, you had a comment.
I've forgotten what it is now. I can ask you tomorrow if I remember.
Yeah, sure, no problem. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everybody.